She crossed my lawn every day, until it crossed back. Every morning at 7:15, the sound of crunching gravel woke me up. It wasn't a delivery truck or a jogger, it was the HOA president, Karen Mitchell, marching straight across my lawn with her clipboard and a mug that said Neighborhood Queen. I watched from the kitchen window, jaw tightening as she trampled through my newly reseeded grass. At first, I thought it was a one-time thing. But by the third day, she'd turned my yard into her personal shortcut to the HOA office, a converted shed behind her house. When I finally stepped outside to confront her, she smiled in that passive-aggressive way only HOA presidents can. "Oh, don't be so uptight, Greg," she said. "It's community property, technically. We all share it, except it wasn't. I owned every inch of that land and she knew it." That evening I printed a neat little sign, "Private property, no trespassing." I planted it right beside her path. The next morning it was gone. In its place she'd left a note, "Greg, please remove any unsightly signage. HOA guidelines strictly prohibit unapproved lawn decor, unsightly." She called my warning unsightly. The next day she marched through again, clipboard in hand, heels sinking into my turf. But this time I recorded everything. I wasn't just angry, I was building a case. That Friday evening, I showed up at the Cedar Pines Community Center, the battleground where neighborhood pride and petty power collided every month. The fluorescent lights flickered above the long table where the HOA council sat, as if even the building itself was tired of their endless rule enforcement. I hadn't attended a meeting in months. Not since Karen took over as president and turned the HOA into her personal fiefdom. But tonight wasn't about listening. Tonight, it was about ending the charade. Karen sat at the head of the table like she was presiding over a courtroom, crisp white blouse, pearls, and that same smug grin she wore whenever she fined someone for leaving their garbage bin out for 5 minutes too long. Her clipboard was stacked with violation reports, color-coded by offense. I noticed one with my name highlighted in red. The rest of the council sat to her left and right, 5 neighbors who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. Greg, the treasurer, kept his head down. Susan, the secretary, nervously adjusted her glasses. 2 others whispered to each other. Only old man Dillard, the vice chair, met my eyes with a knowing smirk. He'd been around long before Karen's reign. I walked to the open seat at the far end of the table, carrying a thick folder labeled "Property Violation Evidence" in bold letters. A few heads turned. Karen's eyes followed me like a hawk. "Well, well," she said, her tone dripping with false charm. "Look who decided to rejoin the community. We thought you stopped caring about the neighborhood standards." "Oh, I care," I replied evenly, setting the folder down. "Especially about people respecting property lines." Her grin tightened, but she kept her voice steady. "You're referring to your lawn issue, I presume." "Exactly that," I said, flipping open the folder. Inside were printed photos, timestamps, and copies of property records. "You've been crossing my lawn almost every morning, cutting straight across from your driveway to the mail kiosk." She laughed, sharp and dismissive. "You can't trespass on community land, Mr. Dawson. That strip is part of the shared green." I slid the top paper toward her, a color-coded map with official county seals. "Actually, that's where you're wrong." The map showed every lot boundary in Cedar Pines. I tapped the section near my hedge. "See that? The community property line ends 6 feet before my hedge. Everything beyond that is privately owned by me." The room went quiet except for the faint hum of the AC. Greg leaned closer, squinting at the map. Susan stopped taking notes. Dillard let out a low chuckle under his breath. Karen's smirk faltered. Her fingers twitched slightly on the pen she was holding. "Well," she began, her tone suddenly careful, "if there's a discrepancy, we can review it later. I'm sure this can be sorted out." "Already sorted," I interrupted calmly. "The county assessor confirmed it this morning. I even recorded the call if you'd like to hear it." Karen blinked. A faint red crept up her neck. "You didn't need to go that far." "Oh, I did," I said, smiling faintly. "Because for months I've received warnings from you for so-called violations, unapproved lawn ornaments, grass height, even non-compliant edging. Meanwhile, you've been walking across my property daily. That's not oversight. That's hypocrisy. The tension in the room thickened. The other board members exchanged awkward glances. One of them muttered, "He's got a point." Karen cleared her throat, pretending to regain control. "Let's move on," she said briskly, flipping to another page on her clipboard. "We have bigger issues to discuss, like the unapproved structure you've been building behind your fence." I leaned back in my chair, hands folded. "Ah, yes, the structure." She looked at me suspiciously. "You admit it, then?" "I do," I said, my smile widening. "But it's not unapproved. It's fully permitted, filed under the county's Privacy and Boundary Improvement Ordinance. A nice little addition that will solve our lawn problem once and for all." Her eyes narrowed. "What kind of addition?" I paused just long enough to make her squirm. "Let's call it a surprise." She scoffed, but I saw the flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. "We'll be investigating it. If it violates HOA visual standards, we'll issue a takedown notice." "You're welcome to try," I said softly. "Just make sure to stay on the sidewalk. Wouldn't want another trespassing incident." Laughter rippled quietly around the table. Even Greg hid a grin behind his hand. Karen shot him a glare sharp enough to cut glass. The rest of the meeting dragged on for another hour. Budget reviews, tree trimming schedules, and petty complaints about Christmas lights left up too long. But I barely heard any of it. My focus was on Karen, on every twitch of her jaw, every time she avoided looking at the map lying right in front of her. When the meeting finally adjourned, I stood and gathered my folder. Karen was packing up her notes, muttering under her breath. As I walked past, I stopped beside her. "For what it's worth," I said quietly, "I did try to handle this politely. You just wouldn't listen." She looked up, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "You think you've won something here?" I shrugged. "Not yet, but soon." I left her sitting there, lips pressed tight, eyes darting toward the window toward my property line, barely visible through the blinds. Outside, the night air was cool, and the street lamps bathed the sidewalks in a pale orange glow. From the parking lot, I could already see the faint outline of the posts being set in my front yard. The workers had started right on schedule, their truck lights glowing softly in the dark. By tomorrow morning, Karen would see it the beginning of a little project I called Operation Boundary. It wasn't just a fence. It was a statement. A carefully engineered, perfectly legal reminder that some lines weren't meant to be crossed. And this time, the next step she took onto my lawn would be her last mistake. That night the porch light hummed like an accomplice as I spread the blueprint across the weathered picnic table. The paper smelled faintly of ink and cold coffee. The plan looked ridiculous to anyone who didn't understand the small, simple mathematics of neighborhoods. A line drawn where it shouldn't be crossed. A few invisible boundaries, an unmistakable message when the line was stepped over. Lucas crouched on the opposite bench, squinting at my scribbles through a smear of sawdust on his knuckles. He was the kind of friend who'd learned to read landscape contours like others read the morning paper, soil compaction, root whispers, where the frost settled last. He picked up a corner of the map and laughed, a short bark that softened when he saw how serious I was. "You're serious about this, huh?" he said, but his grin gave him away. Lucas loved an elegant solution almost as much as he loved a cigar after a hard day's work. "Serious enough," I said, rolling my shoulders as if I hadn't been rehearsing the plan in my head for weeks. "She wants to cross my yard every morning like she owns the sun that only rises on my hedge. Let her try after this." Went over the mechanics again, but not like engineers arguing over bridges. There was no menace in my words, only precision and a little theatrical satisfaction. The blueprint wasn't a weapon, it was a choreography of deterrence. My goal wasn't to trap or humiliate. It was to make boundaries obvious and consequences unavoidable in the most mundane, lawful way. First, the motion sensors. We placed 2 slender units low to the ground, tucked behind the boxwood where they'd be invisible from the street but would catch movement close to the hedge. They would trigger lights and a soft recorded message, nothing loud enough to alarm the neighborhood, but annoying in the way of a persistent doorbell. Cameras were out of the question. I didn't want to escalate into surveillance. The last thing I needed was a privacy complaint. This was about reclaiming my property, not turning my yard into Fort Knox. Lucas ran a finger over the map where the sensors sat and nodded. Smart placement, he said. Low profile, high certainty. She's predictable, always cuts the same path. We can funnel that. Next came the pressure points. The phrase made him pause. I could tell he was already weighing the ethics. I explained them the way I'd been rehearsing. Not spikes, not pits, not anything that could cause harm, just subtle shifts underfoot that would announce themselves with the sort of embarrassment Karen loves least. Imagine, I said, a soft, momentary wobble under one foot, followed by the click of a light and the polite, recorded voice. Private property. Please use the sidewalk. Enough to knock the air out of a smug step, not enough to send anyone to the hospital. He laughed again, the sound softer now. You're building a civility trap, he said. It's petty, it's perfect. We consulted local ordinances, because petty without legal cover felt wrong. I wasn't about to become the villain of my own little civic drama. The county allowed motion-activated lighting for safety. Pressure mats disguised as garden features were okay as long as they weren't dangerous and were placed on private land. Lucas, who dealt with permits for a dozen backyard renovations, printed the relevant paragraphs and circled them in blue ink. We double-checked setbacks, easements, and every line that could be weaponized against me in the HOA's tedious minutes. Keep receipts, he advised. Permits, invoices, warranty slips. If Karen tries to twist this into some non-compliant structure, you'll have a paper trail long enough to make her choke on it. So we made one. Receipts, hand-signed permits, a tidy ledger of purchases and contractor hours. Lucas joked about framing it and hanging it in the living room, but I knew the ledger's real value was for the day Karen tried to rally the council with righteous indignation and a clipboard. I would hand them the ledger like a judge passing sentence. Over the next week we moved like shadows that smelled faintly of mulch and determination. We worked mostly at night, when the neighborhood relaxed into its illusion of innocence. Lucas and I had a rhythm. He dug, I measured. He ran conduit, I tucked wires under mulch. We were careful, because part of the pleasure in what we were doing was that it had to be invisible until it was. There were small joys along the way. Lucas brought a worn thermos and the kind of sandwiches that should be illegal for how good they tasted at midnight. We tested the sensors with dumb animal toys and the soles of our boots. Sometimes we argued about design, whether the recorded voice should be brusque or genteel, before agreeing that it should be neutral, almost bureaucratic. Private property. Please return to the sidewalk. The voice needed to sting because of its calmness, not its volume. Neighbors saw nothing of the work. We kept the schedule tight, the noise to a minimum, and the van in the alley. A kid on his bike waved at us one evening, curious, and we waved back, pretending to be planting new roses. That lie felt cleaner than most truths in cedar pines. I also crafted contingencies. If Karen responded with petty lawsuits or harassment, I would remain calm. I'd let the law move like a slow, certain tide. If she tried to vandalize the install, cameras in plain sight from the porch step, not the yard, would deter her, not because I wanted footage, but because a visible deterrent often stopped people from escalating. Every action had a legal fallback. Every improvisation had documentation. This wasn't just about reclaiming a strip of land. It was about reclaiming calm. On Thursday, I walked the perimeter one last time with Lucas. The grass smelled of late summer and gasoline from the mower. The posts were set, the sensors hidden among hostas, and the pressure pads lay flat like secret coasters waiting for the right footfall. I ran my hand along the hedge, feeling the small rise where my property began. It felt good to own that line again, not in the way of conquest, but in the way of someone repairing a fence that had long since been allowed to sag. Lucas slapped me on the shoulder. You know she'll test it tomorrow, she can't help herself. His eyes were bright, not cruel. She's testing you the way kids test fence gates. Good, I said. The word tasted like coffee and asphalt and satisfaction. Let her test it. We sat on the back steps as the sky went purple and the porch light came on, the same light that had been our witness when the plan first started. I thought about the months of notices, the stapled violation slips, the sanctimony with which Corinne dished out pettiness. I thought about all the times she'd crossed that line without a second thought, as if boundaries were polite suggestions rather than property markers. "Whatever happens," Lucas said quietly, "don't let it make you like her." I nodded. He was right. The trick wasn't in matching spite with spite. The trick was in proving a point without becoming what you scorned. My blueprint had more intention than revenge. It had the patience of someone who knew that rules and lines mattered. By Friday, everything was ready. The lawn looked ordinary to any passing eye. A neat strip of green, a hedge trimmed to precision, a couple of bulbs that might have been flower lights. Nothing screamed engineered defense. That was the point. All I had to do then, truly, was wait. The psychology of waiting felt worse and better than any physical labor. It was sharp, like holding your breath before a plunge. I imagined Corinne's routine down to the tilt of her head, the rhythm of her click-clack shoes, the little handbag she carried like a banner. She had the predictability of a well-worn habit, and that was the one vulnerability I hadn't needed to force. When night deepened and the neighborhood fell into the soft murmur of refrigerators and TVs, I sat on the porch with a mug of tea gone cold. The sensors hummed silently behind the hostas, the pressure pads listened. I heard the occasional dog bark 2 streets over, the sigh of a car passing on the main road, the faint scrape of a tired life moving on. By morning, everything would be different. By morning, the line would not be a line on a map, but a line in the world, visible to anyone who knew where to look, felt by anyone who stepped where they shouldn't. The only question left was how Corinne would react when the world politely and unequivocally told her to stay on the sidewalk. At exactly 7:16 a.m., the quiet hum of the neighborhood broke with the soft click of a hidden relay beneath my hedge, the first heartbeat of a plan weeks in the making. The morning air was still cool, brushed with dew, and the world was peaceful enough to disguise what was about to happen. I'd been up since 6, nursing a mug of black coffee on the porch, pretending to read the paper. But my eyes weren't on the headlines, they were on the hedge. On the small section of grass that had become a battlefield disguised as suburbia, right on schedule, Corinne emerged from her front door like a general inspecting her troops. White blouse, beige slacks, perfect hair. Even her gait had authority, that self-important strut that said, "This street exists because I permit it." Her clipboard rested under her arm. Her phone dangled from her manicured hand, probably mid-text to one of her HOA lackeys about grass uniformity violations. And then she did it. Without hesitation, she stepped off her driveway, crossed the sidewalk, and placed her right foot on my lawn, my property, exactly as she'd done every morning for the past 6 months. The motion sensor hidden under the boxwood bush blinked awake. A tiny, almost imperceptible click echoed beneath the hum of the streetlights. Then came the hiss. At first, it was soft, a whisper of compressed air pushing through the pipes we'd installed beneath the turf. Then the sprinkler head snapped open with mechanical precision, releasing a misty arc that glittered in the sunlight like diamonds. But this wasn't just water. It was a harmless, high-pressure blend of water and biodegradable marking paint, the same stuff landscapers use to mark boundaries before construction. Non-toxic, environmentally safe, and highly visible. Bright, fluorescent green, Corinne shrieked as the fine mist engulfed her from head to toe. The sound she made somewhere between a scream and a strangled gasp echoed down the street. She flailed backward, arms raised, her phone clattering onto the wet sidewalk. The clipboard followed, scattering papers that immediately clung to the grass like soggy flags of surrender. She stumbled again, landing one foot squarely on the second pressure pad. Hiss! Another sprinkler erupted, this one angled slightly upward, hitting her from below like a perfectly timed encore. The result? Her once crisp white blouse turned the color of a radioactive tennis ball. I couldn't help it. I laughed, loud enough for the sound to carry across the lawn. From my porch, coffee still in hand, I called out, "Looks like the lawn finally fought back." Karen froze, dripping, seething, a mix of humiliation and fury that only someone like her could feel. Her mascara ran slightly from the mist, streaking faint green down her cheeks. She looked like a furious swamp queen standing in the middle of my property line. "This is vandalism, Greg," she shrieked, pointing a trembling green finger at me. "No," I said calmly, setting down my mug and stepping off the porch. "That's property protection." She sputtered, trying to form words. "You can't just this is an assault." I kept my tone level, like I was explaining a science experiment to a particularly slow student. "It's a deterrent system, Karen, fully legal. No chemicals, no harm, just a gentle reminder to stay off what's mine." "That's paint," she screamed. "Biodegradable marker," I corrected. "Washes off in under 24 hours, but I'd probably get that blouse to the cleaner sooner rather than later." Across the street, curtains were twitching. Neighbors peered out, silent witnesses to what was, at that moment, the most entertaining event Cedar Pines had seen in years. Mr. Patel from 2 doors down stepped onto his porch, coffee in hand, eyes wide. His teenage daughter was filming on her phone, stifling laughter. Somewhere, a car honked, probably one of the early commuters slowing down just to catch a glimpse of the spectacle. Karen noticed the audience too. Her expression shifted from rage to panic. "You're going to regret this," she yelled, trying to salvage some authority as she gathered her soaked clipboard and phone. "Oh, I doubt that," I said, smiling. "Actually, I think I might frame this blueprint." She stormed off, her heels squelching with every step. The sprinklers gave one last satisfying hiss before shutting off automatically. The only thing left behind was a faint mist rising from the grass and a few splashes of bright green footprints leading back to her driveway. Lucas pulled up 10 minutes later, his truck still loaded with equipment from the previous week. He saw the wet street, the footprints and the green streaks across the sidewalk, and he just shook his head. "It happened, didn't it?" "Oh, it happened," I said, grinning. "Right on schedule." Leaned against his truck, laughing so hard he nearly dropped his coffee. "You're evil in the most lawful way possible." "Evil," I said. "Educational." We spent the next hour making sure the system worked perfectly, checking the timing, resetting the sensors, and ensuring the spray pressure stayed within safety limits. The paint was already beginning to fade where it hit the driveway, exactly as designed. By mid-morning, the gossip had spread. I caught snippets as I passed neighbors later that day. "Heard she got sprayed green. Greg's lawn's got defenses now. About time someone stood up to her." Every whisper was a little victory. Not because I wanted to humiliate her, though, I admit, that part was satisfying, but because for once, people realized that her so-called authority had limits. That the HOA queen's crown could, in fact, be tarnished. Around noon, Karen's husband, Bob, showed up at my door. A polite man with tired eyes and the posture of someone perpetually apologizing for things he didn't do. He cleared his throat awkwardly. "Greg," he said, "Karen's upset. She says you sprayed her with toxic paint." "Biodegradable lawn marker," I corrected again. "Non-toxic, county approved. It's the same stuff used for property boundary work." He sighed, rubbing his forehead. "You know how she gets. Maybe you could just turn off the system for now, smooth things over." I looked him in the eye. "Bob, you know she's been crossing that lawn for months. She's ignored warnings, maps, and meetings. This was the gentlest way I could make a point. If she stays on the sidewalk, it'll never happen again." He hesitated, then nodded. "Fair enough." That evening, word had reached the HOA group chat, and from the tone of the messages I received, I could tell opinions were divided. Half the board accused me of malicious compliance. The other half quietly, anonymously sent thumbs-up emojis, but the best part came the next morning. At 7:16 a.m., the same time as before, Karen opened her front door. She hesitated at the edge of her driveway, clutching her coffee cup and looking at the path she'd once walked so confidently. Then slowly, she turned and took the sidewalk. I smiled from my porch, unseen behind my newspaper, and took a long sip of coffee. The sensors slept quietly. The sprinklers stayed off. The system had worked. But even as peace returned to Cedar Pines, I knew it wouldn't last. Karen wasn't the kind of woman who accepted defeat quietly. Not after being humiliated, and certainly not after the entire neighborhood had witnessed it. I folded my newspaper and leaned back in my chair, watching her disappear around the corner. If I knew her, and by now, I did, she'd be back. Not to cross my lawn this time, but to retaliate in her own way. And that, I thought, would be the real test of the blueprint. By mid-morning, the laughter around the neighborhood had died down, replaced by the low hum of rumor. I'd mowed the edge of the lawn just to enjoy the sight of clean, perfect turf, unmarred by footprints for the first time in months. The sun hung high enough to dry the faint streaks of green Karen had left behind, though traces of it still glowed faintly near the sidewalk, like a badge of poetic justice. At exactly 9:38 a.m., the peace shattered again, this time not with sprinklers but with a sharp, impatient knock. 3 precise raps. I didn't have to look through the peephole to know who it was. The rhythm was pure Karen, the kind of knock that didn't ask permission but demanded compliance. I opened the door to find her standing there, still fuming but freshly scrubbed, her white blouse now cream-tinted from overzealous cleaning. Her hair was perfectly coiffed again, though her expression carried the tight, brittle rage of someone trying to regain a throne. She said crisply, holding out a piece of paper like a royal decree, "You've officially violated HOA regulations. This is your written notice." I took the document without a word, glancing at the bold header. Official HOA notice. Violation of property compliance, malicious installation of unapproved irrigation and landscaping devices, causing environmental staining and public disturbance. I read the words slowly, mostly to savor how absurd they sounded. Malicious installation, I repeated. That's a new one. You've been consulting with a lawyer or just your mirror again? Her lips tightened. This isn't a joke, Greg. The HOA takes property modifications seriously. Your contraption is both unapproved and hazardous to community harmony. Hazardous to community harmony, I echoed, fighting a grin. Karen, the only thing it's hazardous to is your dry cleaning bill. Her eyes flashed. You humiliated me in front of my neighbors. That sprinkler stunt was a disgrace, to me, to this community, to everything we've built here. I leaned against the doorframe, feigning casual interest. You mean everything you've built? The fines, the warnings, the power trips, those are your monuments, Karen. The rest of us are just living in them. She thrust the paper toward me again. You are required to remove all unauthorized equipment immediately or face legal action. Legal action, I said, raising an eyebrow. Now that's interesting, because before you go throwing around words like unauthorized, you might want to look at this. I turned, picked up a second folder from the table inside, and handed it to her. It was thicker than hers, neatly labeled in bold black marker. Evidence, TRSPSSING, property line violation, video RECORDINGS. She blinked. What is this? Documentation, I said. Every instance you've crossed my lawn, including this morning's little performance. All time-stamped, recorded, and stored in both physical and digital copies. Before you file your complaint, you might want to see what trespassing looks like from my cameras. Her composure faltered instantly. The color drained from her face like someone had unplugged her confidence. You recorded me. I nodded calmly. Motion-activated porch cameras, perfectly legal, installed for security purposes. You know, the same ones your beloved HOA encourages every homeowner to use. I even followed the neighborhood guidelines to the letter. Her mouth opened, but no words came. She glanced at the folder as if it might burn her. You wouldn't, she said finally, voice trembling with anger disguised as disbelief. "Oh, I would," I said softly. "And if you file that complaint, I'll forward every frame to the city zoning board and the county property office. They love reviewing boundary violations, especially when the HOA president herself is the offender." For a moment, the silence between us was sharp enough to cut glass. The faint buzz of a lawnmower somewhere down the street filled the space like background music for a confession scene. Her fingers twitched against the folder. She didn't take it, didn't refuse it either. Just stared at it like it was a loaded weapon pointed at her reputation. "You're bluffing," she said, though her voice lacked conviction. I smiled. "Try me." Her eyes darted toward the street, toward the houses with half-drawn curtains, the neighbors pretending not to watch but absolutely watching. She could feel them, the invisible audience that had turned her reign of control into morning entertainment. The great Corinne of Cedar Pines, queen of violations, now reduced to a cautionary tale on someone else's Ring camera. Her voice broke slightly. "You can't just threaten me like this." "I'm not threatening," I said. "I'm offering you a choice. Withdraw the complaint, stay on your side of the sidewalk and we forget this happened, or push forward and we let the zoning board decide who broke more rules." Her mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for oxygen. Then she did something I hadn't seen in all the years I'd known her. She hesitated. Not out of fear, but out of the sudden, shocking realization that she had no rule to hide behind. Corinne was a woman who lived by policy, by paragraphs, by subclauses and bylaws. But this wasn't a rulebook battle anymore. This was a line drawn in real dirt, one I owned and she'd crossed. She finally took the complaint back, folding it awkwardly, her fingers trembling despite her effort to appear composed. "This isn't over," she muttered, her voice brittle. "The board will hear about this." "Oh, I'm counting on it," I said cheerfully. "In fact, I'll be at the next meeting with a flash drive and popcorn." She glared at me one last time, her eyes glinting with the stubborn fire of someone who'd been cornered but refused to admit defeat. Then she turned and walked away, her heels clicking against the concrete like a metronome of wounded pride. As she reached the sidewalk, she stopped. For a heartbeat, I thought she might turn back and hurl another threat, but she didn't. She just looked at the hedge, that invisible 6-foot boundary, and stepped around it. The sight made me smile. For once she walked the long way. I closed the door, setting both folders on the counter. My hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the adrenaline of a small, satisfying victory, the kind you earn through patience rather than shouting. Lucas called 10 minutes later. "So, did she bite?" "Oh, she bit," I said, chuckling. "But she didn't have teeth left to chew." He laughed. "You realize she's going to come at you from another angle, right? HOA types don't just vanish. They regroup." "I know," I said, glancing through the blinds. Corinne was already on her phone, packing her driveway, no doubt plotting her next move. "But this time she's playing defense, and that's new territory for her." He paused. "You ever think maybe you should just sell the house and move somewhere quieter?" "Not a chance," I said. "This is my home, and I'm not letting a self-appointed suburban tyrant decide where I stand." The call ended, and I found myself alone again with the hum of the fridge and the ticking of the old wall clock. I looked at the green grass outside, shimmering in the sunlight, calm, silent mine. Corinne hadn't crossed it again that day, and deep down I knew something fundamental had shifted in Cedar Pines. The queen of the HOA had been dethroned not by rebellion or outrage, but by something far more potent. Her own rules turned neatly against her. But I also knew Corinne. Her silence wasn't surrender. It was strategy, and whatever she was planning next, it would be louder. By Monday morning, the story had spread faster than the morning dew. What began as a single splash of green paint had turned into suburban legend. I was sipping my coffee on the porch when I noticed 2 joggers slowing down near my hedge. One whispered, "That's the lawn," and both started laughing. Another car rolled by, windows down, someone filming on their phone. Apparently my yard had become Cedar Pines' newest tourist attraction. By noon, a photo of Corinne, drenched in green, was making its rounds in the neighborhood group chat. Someone had taken a still frame from the footage I had accidentally left playing on my outdoor monitor. The caption read, "Don't cross Greg's lawn unless you want a free paint job." Even the mailman chuckled when he handed me the day's envelopes. He said, shaking his head, "You made my week." She used to yell at me for stepping on her grass just to deliver her mail. I grinned. Guess karma's got a sense of humor. The real change wasn't in the laughter, it was in the silence. For the first time in months, Karen didn't make her morning rounds with that clipboard of doom. No passive-aggressive notes. No printed warnings slipped under doors. She disappeared from her throne at the center of the cul-de-sac and retreated indoors like a dethroned queen. It was subtle at first, a few people daring to leave their trash cans out overnight without her knocking. Then, bolder acts began. Mr. Jensen parked his boat trailer in the driveway again. The Miller twins put up their Halloween decorations a month early. Even the Taylors, the quietest couple on the block, painted their mailbox blue just because Karen once said, "Uniformity is community." The rebellion wasn't loud, but it was steady. And I could see it in the glances neighbors gave me, half amused, half grateful. One evening, as I was adjusting the sprinklers, a woman I didn't know well, Margaret, from 2 houses down, stopped on the sidewalk. "I just wanted to say," she began, clutching her tote, "thank you. You stood up to her and we've all wanted to for years." I smiled modestly, "Just protecting my property." She nodded. "That's what we all tell ourselves before someone like her takes more than property, takes peace." Peace, that word stuck with me. Cedar Pines had always been marketed as a peaceful community. But peace built on control isn't peace at all, it's quiet fear. And fear was exactly what Karen fed on. Now the balance was shifting. The following Friday, the HOA held its monthly open meeting, this time hosted by someone else. I didn't plan to attend, but curiosity won. When I walked into the community hall, the air was different. No stiff silence. No judgmental eyes darting toward late arrivals. Karen was there in the back, not at the head of the table. Her usual confidence was gone. She wore sunglasses indoors, maybe to hide the last traces of green around her hairline that no salon visit could fully erase. The new acting chairperson, Mr. Patel, cleared his throat. "Before we begin, I'd like to remind everyone that HOA rules are meant to serve residents, not the other way around." A few chuckles rippled through the room. Karen's jaw tightened. Then he said something that nearly made me spit out my coffee. "Also, I'd like to thank Greg for reminding us that property rights are, in fact, real and enforceable." Laughter filled the hall. Even people who used to nod obediently at Karen were laughing. She stood abruptly. "This is harassment. I will not be humiliated like this in my own community." Mr. Patel calmly replied, "No one's humiliating you, Karen. You did that yourself when you trespassed." That was the first time I saw her, without an audience to control. She gathered her things, muttered something about legal counsel, and stormed out. The door slammed, echoing through the room, and for a brief moment everyone just sat there stunned before breaking into applause. It wasn't for me. It was for freedom. After the meeting, people approached me one by one, offering smiles, jokes, even handshakes. I realized that what started as a defense of my lawn had turned into something much bigger. Later that week, I noticed new faces at the park: kids riding bikes, couples walking dogs. The atmosphere had softened. Even the birds seemed louder without Karen's whistle of disapproval cutting through the morning. One afternoon, as I cleaned my garage, Lucas dropped by. "Looks like you started a revolution," he said, laughing. "Not what I planned," I replied. "I just wanted her to stop walking across my grass." He grinned. "That's how revolutions usually start, one stubborn lawn at a time." A few days later, I got a small envelope in my mailbox. No name, no return address, just a handwritten note inside. "You reminded us that we have a say. Thank you, from everyone who was too scared to speak before." No signature, no clue who sent it, but I didn't need one. The neighborhood had woken up. No more whispered complaints, no more silent compliance. Karen's once feared presence had become a punchline, her HOA queen nickname now a meme template used by teenagers on the block. Even her own committee members started reviewing past fines she'd imposed, and one by one, they were overturned. Cedar Pines began to breathe again. I'd walk outside in the mornings now and see people chatting at mailboxes, kids drawing chalk art on sidewalks, neighbors waving at each other without suspicion. And every time I glanced at that patch of grass, the one that started it all, I couldn't help but smile. Because sometimes, the simplest acts of standing your ground can shake an entire system. All it takes is one person saying, "Enough." Karen's power was gone, her influence shattered not by aggression, but by exposure, a reminder that even the most controlling people crumble when the truth catches them under the right light. And as for me, I didn't just reclaim my lawn. I reclaimed peace for myself and for everyone around me. But deep down, I knew this wasn't the end. Karen wasn't the type to stay silent forever. And if I knew her and I did, she was already plotting her next move. But this time, I was ready. For a moment, it felt like peace had finally settled over Cedar Pines. Neighbors smiled, lawns were tended in peace, and even the mail arrived without the sound of Karen's heels striking asphalt like gunfire. But peace, when it comes from someone like her, is never real. It's the calm before the next strike. And I should have known better. A week later, as I was trimming the hedges, an envelope appeared in my mailbox, thick, embossed with that familiar HOA seal. My stomach dropped before I even opened it. Notice of violation, bold, underlined, and neatly typed in that same officious tone she loved. You are in violation of Section 4A, unauthorized installation of security or surveillance devices without HOA approval. Immediate removal required or fines will be imposed. I couldn't help but laugh. Out loud, a short, sharp burst that made my neighbor, Mrs. Klein, peek over her fence. "Karen again?" she asked, half smiling. "Round two," I said. She found a new rule to twist. Was classic Karen: lose a battle, then change the rule book. I went inside, poured a cup of coffee, and sat at the dining table reading every line. She'd cited obscure HOA regulations, referencing aesthetic uniformity and community safety oversight. But none of it held weight. My security devices weren't cameras, at least not the kind she imagined. They were motion sensors, non-invasive, non-recording. And more importantly, they were on my property. Still, I knew how this game worked. If I ignored it, she'd escalate. If I reacted emotionally, she'd spin it as aggression. So I did what I always do: I planned. That afternoon, I gathered every document I had: property lines, receipts, installation permits, and most importantly, the footage of her trespassing the week before her paint-splattered walk of shame. Then, I took a quiet drive to City Hall. The municipal zoning department was as gray and lifeless as I remembered: buzzing fluorescent lights, stacks of paper, and that faint smell of stale coffee that never seemed to leave government buildings. Behind the counter sat a man in his late 50s, wearing wire-frame glasses and an expression that said he'd seen it all. His name tag read, H. McLean, City Inspector. "Morning," I greeted. "Got a situation with my HOA." He looked up with the weary patience of someone who'd heard that line 1,000 times. "Don't we all? What's the issue?" I slid the folder across the counter. "They're claiming I violated Section 4A by installing security devices. But here's my permit, property line map, and footage of the HOA president trespassing." That got his attention. He adjusted his glasses and started flipping through the folder. 5 minutes later, he was shaking his head, half amused, half irritated. "Mr. Blake," he said finally, "you're not just fine, you're meticulous. These devices are fully compliant." Then he tapped a section of the zoning map I hadn't even noticed before. "But what's this?" "The HOA's utility shed, located partially on the greenbelt." I leaned forward. "The one behind Karen's house." He nodded. "Yep. According to this, it extends past the legal boundary line by about 12 feet. That's city property." I smiled slowly. You're saying her HOA structure isn't zoned. He chuckled. I'm saying it's an unpermitted construction, technically city encroachment. If someone filed a complaint, we'd have to investigate. Would that someone need to remain anonymous? I asked, raising an eyebrow. He gave a knowing grin. You'd be surprised how often these things resolve themselves once the right form lands on the right desk. I thanked him, shook his hand, and left City Hall feeling lighter than I had in weeks. 2 days later, the storm hit. It started with a loud truck rumbling into the cul-de-sac early in the morning. I peeked through the blinds and saw 2 city inspectors, clipboards in hand, standing behind Karen's backyard fence. They were measuring, nodding, and photographing. By noon, half the neighborhood knew. Karen stormed out of her house in a sun hat and oversized sunglasses, shouting, "This is harassment. You can't just show up like this." One of the inspectors, McLean himself, calmly replied, "Ma'am, we're following up on a zoning complaint. Your HOA storage structure appears to be on city property without authorization." She turned red, not pink, not flushed crimson. Neighbors pretended to water their plants or take out their trash just to get a look. Even the Miller twins set up lawn chairs. It was the best entertainment Cedar Pines had seen in years. Karen argued for over an hour, waving her phone, threatening lawsuits, dropping phrases like community infrastructure and public benefit. It didn't matter. The law wasn't on her side. By the end of the day, a bright orange sticker was plastered on the shed door. Condemned illegal structure. Remove or face penalty. I didn't need to say a word. That night, as the sun dipped behind the trees, I sat on my porch again, same cup of coffee, same peaceful air. Across the street, Karen stood silently near the condemned shed, her arms crossed, face lit by the fatting glow of defeat. For once, she wasn't barking orders or citing regulations. She was just quiet. Lucas texted me a photo of the orange sticker. Lucas, poetic justice looks good in municipal orange. Couldn't have chosen a better color. Next morning, another HOA notice appeared in my mailbox. This time, it wasn't a violation, it was a resignation. Effective immediately, Karen L. Davenport will be stepping down as HOA president due to personal reasons. Personal reasons, that was putting it mildly. The neighborhood was buzzing again, but this time with celebration. Someone even made cupcakes with tiny orange fondant stickers on top. And me, I just smiled quietly, watching from my porch. Because I didn't win by fighting her. I won by letting her own rules turn against her. Karen had spent years weaponizing regulations, believing she was untouchable. But the same system she used to control everyone had finally caught her, tangled her in her own web of red tape. For the first time in Cedar Pines history, the HOA wasn't feared. It was free, and the best part, I hadn't raised my voice, filed a lawsuit, or broken a single rule. All I did was tell the truth with paperwork. As night fell, the neighborhood lights flickered on one by one. Kids laughed in the distance, sprinklers hissed, and the world seemed right again. But as I stood there, I couldn't shake a thought. People like Karen don't just give up. They regroup. And though her title was gone, her pride wasn't. Somewhere behind those drawn curtains, I knew she was planning something that would make the next round far more dangerous. It didn't take long for the cracks to show. Within 2 weeks, Cedar Pines, almighty HOA, was eating itself alive. Emails flew back and forth faster than gossip at a Sunday barbecue. Board members turned on one another, questioning every decision Karen had ever made. Fines were re-examined. Meetings were rescheduled. The once feared system of control had turned into a circus. Karen, of course, tried to hold it together. She sent long, rambling emails filled with legal jargon and half-quoted regulations, demanding emergency authority to fix what she called a temporary misunderstanding. But the neighborhood wasn't buying it anymore. The same people who used to flinch at her clipboard were now filing formal complaints about unfair fines, about her unauthorized surveillance notes, about the shed she'd built on city land. It was poetic. Every rule she had used as a weapon was now aimed squarely back at her. By the second week, the city inspector's report became public. The shed she had insisted was community infrastructure was confirmed as illegal, and her misuse of HOA funds to build and maintain it had raised eyebrows far beyond our cul-de-sac. There were whispers of audits, maybe even legal repercussions. When the board announced an emergency meeting, everyone knew it was over. The community hall was packed that night, every chair filled, every corner lined with neighbors who once stayed silent under her reign. I sat near the back, not because I was hiding, but because I didn't need to be front and center anymore. My work was done. Corinne walked in late, clutching her binder like a lifeline. She wore a sharp navy suit, but the confidence was gone. Her hair, usually perfect, was fraying at the ends. She looked smaller somehow, like the power she'd carried for years had evaporated with the respect she'd lost. "Let's call this meeting to order," she began, but her voice wavered. No one responded. Mr. Patel, now acting as interim chair, gently took the gavel from her hand. "Actually, Corinne," he said, "you're here to respond, not to lead." The silence that followed was heavier than any shouting match. She glanced around the room, realizing just how alone she was. Even her old allies, the ones who had backed every one of her ridiculous policies, wouldn't meet her eyes. The treasurer stood first, clearing his throat. "Mrs. Davenport," he said, "there have been multiple verified violations under your tenure. Unauthorized spending, zoning violations, selective enforcement of rules." He flipped a page, "and personal conduct unbecoming of an HOA representative." Corinne's eyes darted toward me for a second. "This is all because of him," she snapped, her voice cracking. "Greg Blake has been trying to destroy me since day one. You all know how he is, but no one came to her defense." Patel raised a hand. "Enough, Corinne. This isn't about Greg. This is about accountability." For the first time, her voice faltered. "Accountability," she repeated softly, as if it were a foreign word. Someone in the back, maybe one of the Millers, muttered, "About time." A few quiet laughs followed. Corinne slammed her binder shut, standing tall again, summoning whatever was left of her pride. "You all think I was the problem. You'll regret this. Without structure, this community will fall apart." I stood slowly. "No, Corinne," I said evenly. "We're not falling apart. We're finally standing up." Her lips trembled. "You think you've won, Greg?" she hissed. I leaned back in my chair, calm, almost smiling. "No, Corinne. I just made sure you stopped walking all over people, literally and otherwise." Vote to remove her wasn't dramatic. There was no shouting, no chaos. Just the quiet click of pens as the ballots were marked and counted. Unanimous. Corinne Davenport, removed as president, indefinitely barred from serving on the HOA board. She stood there frozen as the decision was announced, eyes darting from face to face as if she couldn't believe it. For years, she had ruled with intimidation and technicalities. And now, not one person stood up for her. When she finally gathered her things, her hands were shaking. She looked at me one last time, not with anger, but with something closer to disbelief. As if she was only just realizing that the power she'd built had never been real, just fear dressed up as authority. She walked out in silence. No one followed her. The door closed behind her with a soft click that echoed louder than any argument she'd ever started. Mr. Patel turned to the room and said simply, "Let's start over." A small round of applause followed, hesitant at first, then growing louder as relief swept through the crowd. It wasn't celebration. It was release. Neighbors smiled at one another, some for the first time in years. Conversations began about fairness, transparency, and rebuilding trust. It felt like a reset, the kind of moment that only comes after years of quiet resentment finally find their voice. I walked home under the glow of the streetlights, hearing laughter from porches again, seeing kids draw with chalk on the sidewalks Corinne once called a safety hazard. Pines was finally free, and me. I didn't feel victorious. I just felt done, because in the end it wasn't about revenge. It was about peace. And as I glanced back at the community hall, I knew that for once, maybe for the first time, everyone else finally understood the difference. Months later, spring returned. The lawn grew lush again, hiding every sign of our suburban war. I replaced the sprinklers with simple flowers, bright green tulips, right along the path she once used. Sometimes I'd see her drive past, avoiding eye contact. The new HOA president waved when I passed by. Peace wasn't about revenge. It was about boundaries the kind people like Corinne thought didn't exist. Now, every morning when I sip my coffee and look out the window, I smile. Because that lawn, it finally belongs to me again.